Have you ever walked into a place and felt like you didn't exist? Not in the poetic sense of we're just dust in the universe, but in a very real way, you're standing there, flesh and bone, breathing, smiling, speaking, and yet no one sees you. No one greets you. No one cares. Worse, this isn't some tiny eatery on a forgotten street corner. It's a five-star hotel, the kind that once promised to treat you like royalty. And the man who was ignored that day, his name is Jerome Wilson, 47 years old, once broke, once slept in a car at age 23. But today he is a black billionaire, the mastermind behind a prestigious hotel chain that bears his name. He used to believe that if you just worked hard enough, became successful enough, became great enough, and then every door would open. But no, that day in the very hotel he built, he was still treated like an outsider. So what happened next? How did a front desk receptionist dare to delete his name from the system? What made a notoriously private CEO blow everything open in the main lobby in front of dozens of guests? And most importantly, this story isn't just about Jerome. It's about you and me, and the moments when we must rise, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who has ever been dismissed. Take a seat. This story will take you through the ache of silence, the sting of being dismissed, and the quiet satisfaction of a truth unveiled. Because sometimes the best way to teach someone about respect is to let them realize they just lost the chance to stand in history. You know the feeling. You walk into a place, a store, a restaurant, a hotel, and within 5 seconds you realize you weren't greeted. No one looked at you. No one listened. Even though you were dressed neatly, carried yourself politely, no one asked what you needed. That kind of hurt isn't loud. It's subtle, but it cuts deep. That was Jerome Wilson's experience on a Friday afternoon in the lobby of the very hotel he had spent years building. Jerome was a black man, 47 years old. He grew up in a poor neighborhood in Baltimore, once waited tables, once got rejected countless times simply because of his skin color. And then somehow he built a hotel empire under his name, a chain of luxury resorts and five-star hotels known across the United States. People often assume once you're a billionaire, you don't have to deal with those small things anymore. But the truth bias doesn't care about your bank account. That afternoon, Jerome wore a simple jacket, no expensive watch, no assistant by his side. He came quietly, no advance notice, no business card, no I'm the owner here. Just a man checking in. And that's why he became invisible. The receptionist, a young blonde woman in her 20s, glanced past him like he was air. She tapped on her phone, glanced up briefly, didn't smile. No greeting, just a cold yeah. In her eyes, Jerome didn't look like a boss, just a stranger, maybe even someone who couldn't afford the room. And that's when Jerome knew something was very wrong here. Sound familiar? This doesn't just happen to Jerome. It happens every day to millions of people simply because they don't match someone's expectations. They don't dress the luxury way, don't walk the powerful way, don't speak the intellectual way, so they get overlooked. A single mother dismissed by a bank employee, an elderly person ignored by restaurant staff, a young black man followed by a supermarket guard with every step. Sometimes the most powerful, most brilliant, most kind-hearted people don't wear anything to show it. And if you happen to disrespect them, you're not just offending a person, you're closing a door on your own future. And on that Friday afternoon in a hotel he owned, Jerome Wilson didn't just feel disrespected. He felt that it was time to stop pretending. Because this wasn't personal anymore. It was a symptom of a deeper disease within the very system he once took pride in. And so he made a decision. No emails, no meetings, no outbursts. Just one simple act: stay, observe, fix it from the ground up. Normally, when a CEO gets a complaint, here's how it plays out. They send an email to the branch manager, ask them to look into the issue, then wait for a 2-page report that ends with the usual phrase, "We've reminded the staff, and we'll take this as a serious lesson." Jerome Wilson had done that, not once, many times. But this time he chose differently, because he knew some problems can't be seen from the executive floor. You can't measure dignity with a spreadsheet. You can't feel someone's attitude through a report written by a manager covering for their staff. And more importantly, he knew no one fakes their behavior when they think you're just an ordinary guest. So Jerome closed his laptop, turned off his work phone, booked a flight, no calls ahead, No business cards. No messages to the branch director. Just one reservation under his real name like any other guest. He came with one intention, only to observe the truth in its unfiltered state. No one warning staff beforehand. No spotlight ready for his arrival. And as you saw earlier, he was treated like he didn't matter. But at that moment, Jerome felt grateful. Because if he had walked in wearing a $5,000 suit with a PR team behind him, he would have never seen the hidden cracks in the very service he was selling to the world. Want to know if your restaurant truly serves people well? Don't book a table under the CEO's name. Book under your mother's name. A restaurant owner in New York once said that. It sounds funny, but it's real. The higher up you go, the more you're wrapped in polished data and filtered reports. But customers don't live in reports. They live in glances of contempt, in interrupted conversations, in small, repeated mistakes that become unforgivable. That's why Jerome didn't go undercover to find fault. He went to understand the feeling of being treated like he didn't deserve service at the very place he had placed his deepest trust. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. And that clarity led him to the first and most painful discovery. The system wasn't broken. The people inside it were deliberately doing things wrong. What happened when Jerome tried to check in? Why would a receptionist feel entitled to delete his reservation from the system? And what made him realize this wasn't a mistake, but a deliberate act of bias? It all started with a single mouse click and a name, Ashley. She didn't yell at him. She didn't use harsh language. She didn't call security. Nothing overtly blameworthy to call her out for. And that's exactly what made it so dangerous. When Jerome approached the front desk with a gentle smile and calm voice, "Hi there, I have a reservation under the name Jerome Wilson." The young receptionist Ashley didn't even look up. Just a cold flat, "Yeah," and her eyes remained glued to her phone. This is the kind of rejection that comes from invisibility. Not open hostility, but intentional indifference, as if you're not even worth the effort to stop scrolling. Jerome waited, cleared his throat, tapped lightly on the counter. A long, drawn-out sigh from her, as if he was interrupting her break. Then she looked up for just half a second and said, "There's no one under that name in the system. No apology, no double check, not a shred of goodwill." But Jerome knew that system. He had personally approved every line of that interface. He knew for a fact his name had been entered 3 days prior. And regardless of any issue, a regular staff member should have double-checked, offered help, or at least apologized for the inconvenience. Ashley did none of that. This was microaggression, a concept familiar to anyone who has ever been looked down on. It's not the loud kind of discrimination. It hides in the tone of voice, the avoidance of eye contact, the reluctant posture as if you're not worth their time. And it happens every day. To people with different skin tones, people who speak English with an accent, people who simply don't look like they can afford luxury. An Asian student constantly asked, "Where are you really from?" A black woman asked, "Are you sure your card will go through?" An elderly man ignored because he probably doesn't understand technology. Discrimination today doesn't always come with slurs or signs. It weaves itself into casual neglect. And sometimes neglect cuts deeper than insult. Jerome could have walked away. He could have called the branch manager. He could have shouted his identity loud enough for the entire lobby to hear. But he didn't. Instead, he took out his phone, logged into the internal system, and in just seconds, he found something that chilled him to the bone. His reservation had been manually deleted, and the name of the person who did it was right there on the screen. Ashley, front desk. Jerome looked up, his eyes locked onto the young woman who had just erased his name like he didn't deserve to exist. And he knew this wasn't just neglect, this was intentional. There's a truth that every executive knows: systems rarely fail on their own. It's people with their biases, emotions, or negligence who make everything go off track. And Jerome knew that better than anyone. As he scrolled through the internal system on his personal phone, everything became clear. The reservation under Jerome Wilson had been confirmed 3 days ago. The system was working perfectly. No server error, no cross-branch confusion, and most importantly, the reservation was deleted manually. Not a glitch, not a mistake. The log was crystal clear, deleted manually by Ashley. Front desk. Jerome stared at that name, his heart sinking. Not out of shock, But because he knew a staff member only deletes a booking when they feel they have the authority to do so, he looked up. Ashley was still on her phone, not checking on the guest, not following up, not showing the slightest hint of guilt. He asked quietly, "Tell me when a staff member deletes a booking, what happens?" She shrugged. "Then it's deleted." "Not a big deal." Jerome nodded slightly. "And who has permission to do that?" "Just front desk staff, like you." "Yeah." He turned his phone toward her. "Your name's right here. No more denial, no more dodging, just silence." And in that moment, Jerome didn't feel angry. He felt tired. Tired because this wasn't the first time he had seen this happen in the very system he once believed was built on integrity. Sometimes misconduct doesn't hide in blatant disrespect. It hides in misplaced authority handed to the wrong person and the belief that no one's watching. Jerome said nothing more. He took the keycard, turned away. And the moment he entered his room, he opened his laptop, not to answer emails, but to dig into the history of this branch. And what he found made it clear this wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern. The data didn't lie. You just had to be patient enough to listen to it. Jerome sat at his screen opening files one by one. Customer complaint records, internal reports on employee behavior, feedback from past secret audits, and one name kept popping up. Ashley. In the past 6 months, she had been flagged at least 4 times. A black guest denied check-in due to technical issues. A couple asked to present extra documents despite complete reservations. An elderly guest complained about being treated like a burden. A foreign traveler shared that they felt scrutinized at the desk, and every time the same explanations came up, system error, guest misunderstanding. We have reminded the staff. Jerome sat frozen, not because Ashley had hidden her mistakes well, but because her manager Stephen had chosen to ignore them. And that's the scariest thing in any organization. Not that someone messes up, but that the people who know better choose to stay silent. A study from Harvard once revealed, in large organizations, employees with negative behavior who flatter their superiors tend to last longer than genuinely kind coworkers. Why? Because they make managers feel comfortable. And because most managers fear conflict more than they fear being wrong. Not every big-name organization carries big values. A strong brand only matters if it's upheld by people courageous enough to protect what's right. Jerome understood that clearly. Ashley didn't last this long because she was good. She lasted because Stephen chose silence. But tonight, Jerome wouldn't be silent. Because a system only stands firm when the person at the top knows when to rise and when to make hard decisions. Jerome returned to the lobby and walked up to the front desk. Ashley was still there, as if the earlier incident had already been forgotten. He didn't yell. He didn't scold. He simply asked calmly, "Do you know what happens when an employee intentionally deletes a guest booking?" Ashley flinched slightly but tried to maintain her composure. I don't know what you're talking about." Jerome smiled and placed his phone on the counter. The screen lit up, displaying a clear line of text deleted manually by Ashley. Front desk. She swallowed hard. A flicker of panic crossed her face. Gone was the indifference. Gone was the smug look. All that remained was the frantic scramble to escape a truth that could no longer be denied. Jerome didn't interrupt. He let the silence do its job. And when Ashley began to stammer something like, "I thought it was a system glitch," he simply said softly, "You don't need to say anything else. We both know what's happening here." In 2014, the CEO of a restaurant chain in Chicago invited an employee to his office after receiving multiple complaints. Instead of scolding her, he simply showed a video of her ignoring an elderly customer. Then he asked one question: "If that were your mother, would you be okay with it?" The woman burst into tears and resigned on the spot. No firing required. You don't always need to raise your voice to show authority. The truth, if presented at the right moment in the right way, carries more weight than any outburst ever could. Jerome didn't want to humiliate Ashley. He wanted her to face the consequences of dismissing another human being. And more than that, he wanted everyone else in the lobby, staff and guests alike, to understand that respect isn't a privilege. It's a principle. He asked Ashley to assign him another room, one that met the proper standards. She fumbled at the keyboard. After a few moments, she slid a keycard across the desk and said softly, "Room 1427, sir?" Jerome raised an eyebrow. He knew full well room 1427 was the worst in the entire building. Right next to the utility room, facing the dumpster area, and often reserved as a subtle punishment for difficult guests. He picked up the key card, looked directly at Ashley, and asked, "Do I look like someone who's easily fooled?" She remained silent. He smiled gently. "Place the card back on the desk. I designed this building. Did you forget that by now people in the lobby had started to pay attention?" No one said a word, but eyes were lifted from phones locked onto the front desk. A silence not of tension, but of anticipation. Someone was finally speaking up on behalf of them all. Jerome turned and walked away, no threats spoken. He didn't need to, because in that moment he knew Ashley wasn't the biggest problem. The real problem was the person who had allowed her to remain in the system all this time. And that person was sitting in the office behind the lobby. Jerome walked into the branch manager's office without knocking. He didn't have to. After all, he was the one who had signed the papers appointing that position. The man behind the desk was named Stephen Lane, and the moment he saw Jerome, his face turned pale. "Mr. Wilson, I didn't know you were coming." Jerome quietly closed the door behind him, leaned against the wall and folded his arms. No shouting, no accusations, just silence and a gaze that didn't waver. "Stephen," Jerome began, "do you know what's happening at your front desk? I think things are fine. I've been reminding the team regularly." "You're wrong," Jerome cut him off. "I was just deliberately erased from your system by one of your staff, Ashley. No apology, no accountability." Stephen froze. There was no way out now. Ashley's name had appeared too many times in too many reports, and he knew it. He just never had the courage to act. Jerome stared straight at Stephen. "You've known about this before, haven't you?" Stephen swallowed hard. I I thought maybe she wasn't familiar with the process." Jerome chuckled, not a warm laugh, but the kind of chuckle from someone who's heard too many excuses. "Stephen, she's not an intern. She's been here for nearly 2 years. And you've had a pile of reports warning you about her behavior. But what did you choose to do? Nothing." In 2021, a major tech company in the US let a team leader remain in his position for 3 years, even though over 14 complaints had been filed about his psychological harassment. Why didn't the company act? Because the man delivered good results. Until one day a leaked video went viral and public outrage exploded. Only then did the company scramble to take action. But it was too late. Trust can't be rebuilt with just an apology. Leadership isn't just about making decisions, it's about being brave enough to face the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. A decaying organization doesn't begin with bad employees. It begins with intentional silence from those who should have stood up. Jerome sighed. His tone softened. "I'm not here to destroy you. I'm here to save the brand I built with my youth. And to do that, I need people at the top who are brave enough, not just when the boss is watching, but when no one else is." Stephen lowered his head. He knew any excuse now was just noise. Only action would matter. Jerome stepped forward. "You're going to walk out there and deal with this, right now, in front of everyone. Because if you won't do the right thing, then I will." Stephen nodded, slowly, heavily. But this time, there was no more avoidance. Just a few minutes later, the entire hotel lobby fell into a heavy silence of expectation. Stephen, his face ashen, stepped up to the front desk. Ashley stood there, back turned, still unaware of the storm approaching. "Ashley," he said, his voice almost trembling, "I need to inform you, your contract is terminated effective immediately." Silence erupted. No applause, no cheers, only glances shared across the lobby, as if everyone was watching an old wound finally being opened for healing. Ashley reacted angry, defensive, trying to blame the system, but no one defended her. And as she stormed out, Jerome's gaze remained steady. Not cold, not cruel. Just the gaze of a man who knew forgiveness is necessary, but accountability is not optional. It seemed like the story had come to an end, but Jerome knew firing one employee doesn't change a culture. If he truly wanted to rebuild this house, he had to change the foundation. And to do that, he needed truth. Every piece of feedback, every injustice, every crack in the guest experience had to be brought into the light. A hotel lobby is supposed to be a place for greetings, soft laughter, and the scent of fruit-infused water. But that afternoon it became a courtroom where truth was put on trial and every eye became part of the jury. When Stephen announced Ashley's dismissal, the whole space seemed to freeze. No one spoke. No one intervened. Only eyes watching, acknowledging, and quietly nodding. Perhaps because in that moment everyone had once been the victim, overlooked, dismissed, reduced to a nameless shadow in front of someone who thought they had the power to decide who deserved respect. And now they were witnessing the opposite. Someone standing up, naming the wrongdoing, and doing what was right. Ashley walked away, her face flushed with anger. She still didn't understand or didn't accept why her actions had led to this outcome. But Jerome didn't follow. Didn't say more. He knew sometimes silence is the most humane ending to a long string of mistakes. After a few moments of stillness, the air in the lobby began to move again. But it was no longer the same. Something had shifted. A middle-aged man stood up, walked to the front desk, looked Jerome in the eye and said quietly, "Thank you for not letting it slide." A young woman, one of the housekeepers, wiped away a tear in the corner near the staircase. Maybe Ashley had yelled at her once. Or maybe she had just waited a long time for someone like her to finally be defended. Public accountability, even when done quietly, has immense power. Because it doesn't just correct wrongs, it warns, it teaches, and most importantly, it restores trust in those who had long been forgotten. There's a memorable example from an American airline company. After a black flight attendant was discriminated against by colleagues, leadership chose to handle it internally. The result, no one knew what happened. No behavior changed. But when a different executive chose a different path, he called a full crew meeting, read aloud an apology, and publicly announced the new changes. The culture within that team began to shift, not out of fear, but because people saw themselves in the story. Justice is not humiliation. Real justice is when the one who wronged is held accountable and the one who was hurt feels seen and protected. And Jerome understood that deeply, so he didn't stop at firing one person. He turned to the front desk, picked up the internal phone, and spoke simply, "This is Wilson. Shut down this hotel immediately for a full audit. All complaints will be reviewed. Every employee will be reevaluated. And every guest who was ever mistreated will be contacted and apologized to." The entire lobby held its breath. Not out of fear, but because everyone knew something important was being restored: trust. A young new employee, barely a few weeks into the job, timidly asked, "What department are you from?" Sir Jerome turned, smiled gently. "I'm the one who built this place." A soft "oh" echoed. One receptionist whispered to another, "That's him. That's Jerome Wilson." And from that moment on, no one ever mistook him for just another guest again. But more importantly, they stopped dismissing other ordinary guests too. Because sometimes the person you overlook today might be the one who holds your future tomorrow. The recovery journey started there in a lobby that once felt insignificant. And Jerome wasn't about to stop. Because what he wanted wasn't a personal win. He wanted a culture rebuilt on respect. Firing someone, even if satisfying, is never enough. It's like pulling a weed, but leaving the rotten root beneath the soil. And Jerome knew if he didn't change the entire ground beneath this place, it would all repeat again, just under a different name. That night in a room he chose for himself, not the fanciest but peaceful, Jerome opened his laptop and began the real work: cleaning up, checking every brick, fixing the foundation. First, he asked the technical team to download every customer complaint from the past 2 years at this branch. The results were painful. A guest denied check-in because they were from a high-risk country, though no policy stated that. One said the receptionist talked like she was yelling. Another complained of being treated coldly for wearing a worker's uniform, while other guests were offered orange juice. And the common thread: no one received a formal apology. No one was contacted. No one was compensated. Jerome began handwriting a list, one by one. Every person, every mistake, not to blame, but to respond with the kindness they always deserved. He launched a program called Redemption, Rebuilding Trust. Send personal apology letters to each guest who had been mistreated. Offer 3 free nights at any hotel in the chain. Upgrade them to legacy guest status, guaranteeing lifelong priority support. Because Jerome understood a reputation isn't protected by silence. It's rebuilt brick by brick with sincerity. A major retailer in Japan once faced backlash for discriminating against Chinese tourists. Instead of denying it, they reached out to every guest, invited them back, trained all staff, and issued a public apology. The result, 3 months later, the very guests who had complained returned and wrote glowing reviews, not because they forgot, but because they felt respected. Justice is the starting point. Rebuilding trust is the destination. Only when you treat those once hurt with the deepest respect can you truly say you've repaired the foundation. The next morning, Jerome held an early staff meeting. No spotlight, no microphone. Just him standing in the center of the room facing the remaining team. He told them everything. And then he said, "I didn't come here to find who's wrong. I came to find who still wants to do what's right." Then he made a promise anyone willing to change would be kept retrained and led into a new chapter. But those who treated guests with contempt, who disrespected the profession, who disrespected people, should leave today. There was silence, but not the uncomfortable kind. It was a silence of real listening. And for the first time, eyes began to shine with genuine respect. Jerome had cleared the old foundation. Now it was time to rebuild. Not just the system, but the spirit, so that ordinary people could walk into this hotel and be greeted with respect, not judgment. Because sometimes the greatest change doesn't come from a PR campaign. It comes from a CEO who chooses to stand in the lobby, listening like an anonymous guest. That whole morning, Jerome never mentioned his title, never brought up his position, never introduced himself as the boss. He listened, observed, corrected as someone inside the system, not above it. And the interesting thing, that very lack of title was what made people listen to him sincerely. Not because they feared him, but because they felt guided. It wasn't until the end of the meeting that a young receptionist just 3 weeks into the job timidly raised her hand. "Sir, may I ask, who are you?" The whole room chuckled softly, not at the innocence of the question, but because everyone else had also been wondering the same thing. Jerome simply smiled, reached into his pocket and pulled out an old employee badge. The name printed in bold, Jerome Wilson, founder and CEO. No dramatic music, no applause, just a quiet moment. Then came the wide eyes, the hands covering mouths, and the looks not of fear, but of realization. He didn't need to act like the boss, to lead like one. Like the person pulling the ropes behind the curtain in a theater, Jerome didn't need to walk on stage. He just had to make sure the curtain lifted at the right moment and every player knew where they were standing. Walt Disney once disguised himself as a tourist at Disneyland to listen to employees giving wrong instructions. Afterward, he didn't fire anyone. He simply had the entire team retrained, and next time he himself played the role of a difficult guest to coach them. To this day, that story is told as a symbol of a leader who listens and teaches by example. You don't need to shout your name to change an organization. You just need to act right and let your actions speak louder than your business card. That afternoon, as Jerome was preparing to leave, a housekeeping staff member quietly approached. She pulled out a small piece of paper from her uniform pocket, handwritten, "Thank you for seeing us." Below was a shaky heart drawn with a ballpoint pen. Jerome smiled, folded the note, and tucked it into his wallet. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was the most valuable reward of his entire trip. He walked out of the hotel, no grand farewell, because he knew everyone left inside that building would now do their jobs just a little better, not because they were being watched, but because they had finally been touched by something decent. In the hospitality world, there's an unspoken saying, people may forget the room, but they never forget how they were treated. Jerome didn't come to scare anyone. He came to remind everyone that respect isn't a luxury, it's a standard, and it must begin with the very people who wear the uniform each day. A small gesture, a thankful glance, a timely word. It may not change the world, but it's enough to transform the culture of the place where we live and work. And if one day you walk into a hotel and you're greeted with a genuine smile, whether you're in designer clothes or just an old t-shirt, know that there was once a man who chose to stay in the shadows, just to help an entire system learn how to see the light. Share your story in the comments, a time you were dismissed, or a time you saw someone stand up like Jerome did. Because every story shared is a brick laid to rebuild a kinder world. And if this story made you pause and reflect, please like and share this video with someone you believe needs to see it. Don't forget to subscribe to That Person Was Me, where every week we bring you true stories, small moments that shake entire systems. And if you love content like this deep, real, emotional, turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Because who knows the next person to stand up? Could be you.